I have no other words to describe my results other than it's a bloodbath. I have checked and rechecked these figures. I retested with a fresh install of Windows 11 just to be sure. Nothing I did made it better. In fact, some of the things I did made it worse. So to the best of my knowledge, these figures that you're about to see are accurate. I should thank Cyberpower for sending over this beautiful system, complete with a Ryzen 9700X and an RX 7900 XTX, which is the GPU that I've done all of this testing with at 1080p. I'll have a full write-up of this system on my website soon if you want to know more, or there'll be a link in the description that you can check them out directly. Actually, I need to double thank Cyberpower because they were also the ones to provide the 14700K and 7800X3D for me to test here, all at pretty short notice, so thank you to them. Definitely go check them out. Right, without further ado, let the bloodbath commence. Right out of the gate, we'll start with CS2. This is at low settings, which if you want to play competitively is generally where you'll be at, and well, as somewhat expected, the 7800X3D absolutely runs away with it. It's over 100 FPS faster than the 14700K, and effectively 200 FPS higher than the 265K. While dropping 200 FPS does sound pretty horrible, at 544 FPS average, it's still perfectly fine, but my god, the AMD chips run away with it. The 7800X3D is 34.4% faster than the 265K here, and hell, even the 14700K is a full 16% faster than the newer counterpart. That's not a good sign. Cyberpunk on medium settings is even worse. The Ultra 7 can't even break 200 FPS when the 14700K, 9700X, and 7800X3D all can. The 14700K is 12.4% faster than the 265K here, and the 7800X3D is a whopping 40% ahead. It's 70 FPS faster. 70! When you're talking about, 180 FPS average, adding 70 more is no small feat. It's not unnoticeable, especially on a high refresh rate monitor, and neither is the 45 FPS difference in 1% lows. That is a shocking result to see. I'm honestly gobsmacked on that one. Sadly for Intel, Shadow the Tomb Raider isn't any better. The 265K nets 241 FPS average, down from 270 FPS on the 14700K and 331 FPS on the 7800X3D. That puts the 14700K 11.6% ahead of the 265, and the 7800X3D is 37.5% ahead. At least at 240 FPS, you're unlikely to notice much of a difference, but when even a 9700X is, trouncing your brand new chip, and the 9800X3D is looming large, it's safe to say you're not in a good place. Microsoft Flight Simulator, at least on medium settings, shows Intel chips weren't just tested badly, as the 14700K does lead the 9700X by 7 FPS. But the 265K is still squarely at the back of the pack, and by a good margin. The 14700K is 20 FPS faster, or 17.8%, and the 7800X3D, which by now is looking like the clearest choice for a new mid to high-end gaming CPU, ran almost 40 FPS faster, or 33.5%. At least for this configuration, the 265K isn't looking like a great option. Rainbow Six Siege was honestly the biggest surprise for me. At 1080p on medium settings and using DirectX 12 rather than DirectX 11, as DirectX 12 is now the default since they removed Vulkan earlier this year, something I've missed in my last video, my apologies. It's sort of the more, the more feature-rich option anyway, and yeah, both Intel chips struggled by comparison, offering around 400 FPS compared to 600 plus on the AMD chips. With that said, the 7800X3D did its usual party trick of running away with the lead, netting 665 FPS on average compared to just 402 on the 265K. Now, much like CS2, this really doesn't matter that much in the real world, but my god, this isn't good. The 14700K is only 7.3% ahead, but the 7800X3D, that's 65.4% ahead. Yeah, over 50% faster. That's just insane. Now, Hitman 3's built-in benchmark lets me break out the CPU and GPU data, and obviously it's the CPU data you're seeing here, meaning this is as close to an isolated in-game test as I can give you, and this does show the 9700X's sort of relative weakness, and shows the 7800X3D as at least a little closer than its usual party trick, but it is still 16% faster than the 265K. And even the 14700K is 6% faster, the smallest margin I collected here. Meaning, even in what is essentially a best case scenario for the new Ultra 7 parts, it's still slower than the last gen Intel parts and a decent bit back from the now soon to be last generation AMD 3D V-Cache part. Oh boy. And to round us up, Starfield is possibly the most promising result for the 265K, as it does show it beating the 9700X, and the spread is considerably tighter too, meaning the 14700K is only 6% faster, and the 7800X3 is only 12% faster. Only. We are still talking about a pretty appreciable difference though. 144 FPS on the 265K or 162 FPS on the 7800X3D is something you might actually feel, and of course it's an indication of the future of the part too. At least from my admittedly limited testing, the 14700K ended up being 11% faster on average, and the 7800X3D averaged a whopping 34% more performance across those games. I honestly didn't believe those results. I tested and retested to make sure. I did a BIOS update and retested only to lose a bit of performance. This was mostly with APO disabled, especially since none of Intel's pre-launch materials covered the 265K at all, so I had no idea what to expect or any recommendations. But others have really only seen a couple of percent performance improvement in the supported titles, so that doesn't seem like a big deal. While I don't think that this is exactly realistic for someone with a 7900 XTX to be playing something like Cyberpunk at 1080p, I opted for that as it generally works better to see the differences in CPU testing. You know, testing at 1440p or 4K will yield less dramatic results for sure, as the GPU becomes more of the limiting factor, but if you want to actually test the CPUs, 1080p is generally where it's at right now. I should also note that the 265K was tested with DDR5 6400 CL38 RAM. Check out my RAM testing video in the cards to see why, but since that is the maximum frequency you can use before you void the CPU's warranty, I think that's a fair choice. If you're wondering about power efficiency, well, being a one very broken man band and only having access to all of these chips for literally just a couple of days, I think I've had them for maybe 4 in total, I wasn't able to test that yet. But if you want to see that, please do let me know in the comments and I'll see if I can get that done. But at least on the productivity benchmark side of things, I saw a pretty drastic drop in the stable power consumption from 264 watts on the 14700K, the power limits were disabled by default, so that's what I tested with, down to just 184 watts on the 265K, and a corresponding drop in temperature from 89 degrees Celsius, still with a 360 mil AIO, down to just 70 degrees. All to get pretty similar or slightly slower performance. Cinebench shows the 265K slightly ahead in both single and multi-threaded, but Blender has the 14700K ahead, especially in the longer gooseberry render. Interestingly, the AMD chips are actually considerably behind here, thanks to their paltry 8 cores compared to the 20 that are in these. I mean, 12 of those are efficiency cores, but they are still cores and they still do something, so there you go. In short then, this is a bloodbath for Intel. In my testing anyway, the 14700K is clearly the better choice, and that's really saying something. The 1700X3D is clearly the victor here, only slightly overshadowed by the recently announced 9800X3D. I say announced in quotes there because AMD just said, hey, this is gonna exist soon, to usurp Intel's launch even more than they already accidentally have. And that isn't even considering that if you buy an AMD motherboard, say a nice B650 board for example, that should continue to get new CPUs for years at this point, whereas these new Z890 boards for Arrow Lake have no guaranteed support lifespan. AMD has committed to keep making AM5 chips until, I think, 2027, whereas Intel wouldn't even say this brand new socket will last more than one chip cycle, and even if it does, Intel isn't exactly known for their long-term support. And actually, speaking of support, this all ignores Intel's recent crisis with the 13th and 14th gen chips destroying themselves. The problem itself is one thing, but it took Intel months to figure it out, and they spent most of that time blaming everyone but themselves. They've only very recently agreed to extend warranties and make things even remotely right, which compared to AMD's response when their, chip melting crisis happened, makes it clear which one I would rather opt for. Honestly, it kind of looks like Intel's in a pretty sorry state right now. And that isn't a good thing. Their brand new chips seem kinda dead on arrival. Chips that Intel aren't even making themselves now, as all of the logic tiles are made by TSMC, with only Intel's base tile being Intel made, and they must be struggling on the manufacturing front too. For us consumers, this is not good. AMD being in this position is what led Intel to this very state. So I really hope that Intel can pull it out of the bag for either with firmware, BIOS updates, or just the next generation. With that said, this sure looks like one to skip if you're building or upgrading a gaming PC right now. Of course, with that said, those are my thoughts, but I'd love to hear yours in the comments down below. I'm sure you've seen some of the other videos with the U9 and the U5. Let me know what you think of the range now you've seen at least some benchmarks. And yeah, if you want to see more videos like this one, hit the subscribe button. Like I said, if you want to see the efficiency numbers, especially through gaming, let me know in the comments and subscribe for that. Feel free to check out the other videos in the end cards, including the memory testing video, and check out plenty of links in the description if you want to support the channel. There's my own hardware tools, the open source response time tool and open source latency testing tool, Amazon affiliate links and stuff like that, and of course Cyberpower as well. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed it, see you on the next video.